Amen. So I love that Miriam tonight opened up with Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements. As I was sitting in my chair thinking about what in the heck am I going to speak about tonight, as Camille already pointed out, I was thinking back to when it was that I read that book and who I was when I read that book. I was living in Hawaii at the time. I was just getting out of a terrible relationship. I was very depressed. And my only option at that point was to turn to books. I stumbled upon Miguel Ruiz's Four Agreements. And one of the first agreements that Miriam talked about was being impeccable with your word. And I thought about that as I was reading the book. I had always been one of those people that loved to embellish the story. I've always been a storyteller, so at a bar after a few drinks, maybe the story would get grander and grander and grander. And that sort of spilled over into little other things throughout my life. You know, where am I going tonight when my aunt and uncle are asking, or what am I doing later? All those tiny little lies started to add up and compound. And I think that what happens is when you tell those tiny little lies over and over and over again, you get a little bit more distant away from yourself. Corrosion, perhaps, if you could think of a visual. That corrosion that you might see in the engine of a car that you might ignore for years and years and years until all of a sudden the engine falls out. Well, that is exactly what was happening to me at that time in Hawaii. I had let corrosion occur for many, many, many years. And so now, I saw it as a dare. Become impeccable with your word. I took it to a little extreme. Remember the movie Liar, Liar with Jim Carrey? I started telling everybody about themselves. You know what, I can't hang out with you anymore. Hey, you do this, this, and that. I went a little far. But what I really did was I began to get honest with myself. Brutal honesty. So that all those little excuses that we tell ourselves to smooth things over, they didn't fly anymore. I started to look in the mirror a little bit differently. That corrosion that had occurred over the years, that rust that had settled in all those tiny little joints, they all had to be cleaned. The quote that Miriam used this evening, which I love, was, "We need to be aware that we are not free in order to be free." The thing is with corrosion is you don't even realize that you've locked yourself in a cage. Now, the reason why this is so relevant to me in my life right now is that just 2 months ago, I woke up realizing that I had landed in the same or similar place that I was in 2007 in Hawaii. I had let that same kind of corrosion happen for years and years on end. It's the type of thing that you don't notice as it happens. In fact, with the gaze of mindfulness, I had allowed things to be swept under the carpet a little bit by little bit by little bit. Until all of a sudden, one evening, I was given the opportunity to see things differently. A friend of mine suggested that I take a look at something in my life. And when I did, I realized that it was not at all as I thought it was. That corrosion had come in and rusted things that I wasn't willing to see. That impeccableness with my word had been lost. What happens living in New York is that we have all this noise around us. When I was in Hawaii, when I began this spiritual journey, I was meditating every day. I was out in nature. I was surfing. I was taking time to myself, and I was really being guided by my intuition. In New York, we get caught up in the fast pace, and we go, 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 do. And little by little, that corrosion comes in. We lose a little bit of that intuitive voice that guides us. That voice that tells us that corrosion is happening. So 2 months ago, yesterday, I woke up and I realized that my relationship was not at all as I thought it was. Here I was, only been married a year, and I realized that things had rusted over more than I thought that they had. I felt this awakening in my body. I was fearful and yet excited. I was ashamed and yet exhilarated. Some of my friends hadn't even sent me their gift yet. They still had a few more days before the year was over. And here I had to tell my family that the beautiful wedding that they had put on for me was null and void. Some people would say because it's a marriage, I'm supposed to work on it. Some people would say because we're newlyweds that these bumps in the road are going to happen and we have to suck it up. But because of my experience in Hawaii, because of reading books like Don Miguel Ruiz and others, I knew very well what it's like to have that feeling, that absolute knowing in your body. That intuitive guide, that strong gut feeling that doesn't allow any room for doubt. That doesn't allow any room for outside influences that say you're supposed to do this because society says you're supposed to work on it. So in 2 months' time, I've allowed myself to see the things that I did that let this corrosion set in. I've looked back now, hindsight being 20/20, and I can now see along the way where the mistakes were made that I wasn't listening to that intuitive voice. And every time that we don't listen to that intuitive voice, when we get caught up into the noise, we get further and further and further away from who we are. So in my coaching practice, one of the first things I address with my clients is this thing called living in alignment. I want you to wake up thinking the things that you want to accomplish in that day, that you'll go to bed having accomplished them. So often we say things that we want, and then we do something else. So what I consider living in alignment is when we're saying and doing very similar things. Here I was able to coach others to do it. And I was able to see so vividly other people making those mistakes, and yet I was living those same mistakes myself. So now it's time for me to come back to my word. It's time for me maybe to revisit that book. It's time for me again to get impeccable and clean out the engine of all that corrosion. So the title of my speech tonight was Living in the Moment. And I wanted you all to experience the vulnerability of what it is to get up here and live in the moment. Right now I'm living an honesty that I haven't recognized in myself in years. So this is what it looks like.